Another perspective on the election now from a Canadian. Paul Adams is a professor at Carleton University and a former journalist. He was in Lebanon for the vote as part of a team of election observers from the National Democratic Institute. Paul, first describe where you were and what you actually saw.
Right, so I was posted in the south of the country, predominantly Shiite area dominated by Hezbollah and its Shiite partner Amal, which is another Shiite party, though there are substantial populations of Druze, some Sunni, some Greek Orthodox, so it was a predominantly Hezbollah Amal area, but politically a bit of a mixture. It's right along the Israeli border there, so heavy United Nations presence, heavy Lebanese army presence. You can look across the field into Israeli territory. So it's and it's also the part of the country that has been occupied on a number of occasions by Israel or been involved with conflict with Israel.
So given that kind of location and even the diversity of the population, was there tension around the vote? Was it a worrisome situation?
I wouldn't say there was tension because in that part of the country, it's not as intensely competitive as other parts of the country because the support for Hezbollah and its allies in the other communities is so strong because of Hezbollah's role. They're seen as being the resistance, the power that pushed the Israelis out in the past. And so there's a very wide social support. Now, it should be said that there's also a lot of social pressure and maybe some, I mean, we did have some evidence of more overt pressure. For example, a young woman who was running on a reform candidate, a veiled Shiite Muslim woman, told us that her sister had turned up at a medical dispensary and she had been told, why don't you ask your sister for help? In other words, she was being denied services because she was running against Hezbollah. And this young woman, the report was that she was actually kind of locked up in a polling booth at one point during the day by supporters who, so there's a lot of pressure on anyone who's going to buck the tide in that part of the country, especially in the Shiite community.
I was going to say, at the same time, this election was run a little bit differently, as I understand it. In the past, people brought ballots to the polling booth. This time they were presented. So you've monitored other elections in the country, the last one being almost a decade ago now. How was this one different?
Well, the one big advance here was greater secrecy in the ballot booth because, as you say, in the previous elections, you could come out with any piece of paper with the names of the candidates you were voting for. And in fact, what actually would happen is usually the party would hand you a ballot that was pre-printed with the names and you just stuck it in the box. What would happen is, you know, the Smith family would get the candidates in one font and the Adams family would get it in another font or in a different sequence, so they could track whether the Smith family voted the way they had been paid to vote or they had been told to vote or whatever the circumstance would be. This time it was much more like we see elsewhere, a little bit complicated, but you voted for a party list. So Hezbollah, say, or the Lebanese forces are one of the parties of the list, and then you voted for one candidate on that list. So it was simpler, it was secret, it was done with a tick or an X, much harder to track who voted which way.
I know there's certain language around the way people assess these kinds of elections as being, I suppose, substantially free and fair. And right. I know you were looking at one particular area, but did it give you confidence in what you saw?
I think nowadays election observers try to stay away from that language because it's so general. It was a very well-run election on election day. There were instances, not where I was, but in other parts of the country where we saw vote buying. The restrictions on campaign spending are so limited that they're laughable, really. Like the amount that can be spent is enormous, and it means that the established candidates have a huge advantage over any like civil society or reformist candidates and so on. So, but I think as an electoral exercise, yes, it was broadly well run. It reflected, in all likelihood, the feelings of the people on the day. And as is often the case, or usually the case in Lebanese politics, it's all really going to be worked out later between the parties, because the system is such that it's really impossible for any party, including the current Prime Minister's party, Hariri, who lost seats, or Hezbollah that gained seats, or it's impossible for any party really completely to dominate. So when the changes in the election, in the standings of the parties, really, it's like moving a piece or a couple of pieces on a chessboard. It changes all the relationships of all the other pieces, but it doesn't transform things in a single moment. It's still the same chessboard, it's still the same general weight of power, but it's shifting a little bit.
Paul, thank you very much for coming in and for your perspective on this.
No problem.